I've been waiting to speak to our next guest for a long, long time. There's a bloke in the UK who's been warning about the threat of radical Islam and terrorism for years and years and years. And he has previously been described as Britain's most hated man. Why? Well, it turns out that he speaks the truth. But when he started speaking the truth, a lot of people just didn't want to hear it. And now more and more people are saying, well, maybe Tommy Robinson was onto something. He has seen firsthand how young people have become radicalised in Western countries. Tommy Robinson describes prison as a hotbed of radicalisation. He points to all the terror attacks where the perpetrator was known to authorities and had been to jail. And he knows a lot of this because he's been to prison himself. He's a strong advocate for separate jails for Muslims and non-Muslims to prevent vulnerable people being radicalised. Tommy Robinson decided to speak out after he noticed his town was changing and the separation between Muslims and everyone else seemed to be growing wider and wider. He grew up in a working-class neighbourhood in the town of Luton, north of London. In 1982, Luton had one mosque, but now, thanks to the large Pakistani community, there's over 30 mosques in Luton. Tommy has continuously warned people about the failed integration of Muslims into wider society. He became the leader of the English Defence League. He's since left that organisation, but still speaks out passionately on this topic. Tommy Robinson joins us on the line from the UK. Tommy Robinson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, man.
You're very kind for coming on and talking to us. I know you're a busy man. Why do they describe you as Britain's most hated man?
They do that, and in our country and in the Western countries, they've done that to anyone who's critical or speaks out or challenges or points out the negative aspects of Islam. You're called far right, you're called racist, you're called a bigot. They like to put working class people into a box, into a category, in order so that they slander them and people don't listen to them. Now, the fact that people say I'm the most hated man, when I first started talking about these issues years ago, which I've been going back 8-9 years, I started warning and explaining things that were happening in the UK. The reason why I know and understand these things is in my hometown, Al-Mujahideen, which are now a prescribed terrorist organisation, Omar Bakri, Abu Hamza, the Hook Hand, their head office was in my hometown. My hometown was a launch pad for the 7/7 bombings. It was the fertiliser bomb plot, the Stockholm bomber. I know most of these people. I know many Muslims I grew up with and even went to school with have gone to fight for ISIS. So I understood the problems that we're facing. I started talking about sexual exploitation, where large groups of Muslim men are taking young white girls as sexual slaves. They're raping them, pimping them and beating them. But when I started talking about all these issues, you have to understand that it was before Lee Rigby was killed. It was before 7/7 originally. So most people didn't want to hear or didn't really understand. As the years have gone on, everything I warned about and everything I said about, like now it's a known fact in government reports that Pakistani and Muslim men were grooming and raping young girls at an industrial level across our country. The police were ignoring it. The politicians were ignoring it. In fact, there was a conspiracy of silence between all of them to allow it to happen, and the reason for that they were scared of being called racist. That's just how powerful political correctness is. So I was warning about it for years. So in the early days, a lot of people didn't want to hear it. We were labelled, and the media done a campaign against us where we were called racists or extremists. Now, as we've moved on through the years, people are now understanding what they were saying was true. And you can go back, people can dig back through my speeches, going back through all the years. For example, Lee Rigby's killer. Before he beheaded Lee Rigby, we made a video about him the year before. All of these different extremists we've warned about, all of them. We've warned about, we've followed them, we've highlighted them. I campaigned locally against an Islamic centre in my town, which is a Wahhabist Salafist centre, and it's just now Khalid Massoud, who was the most recent terrorist in the attacks in London, in Westminster, where he run over loads of people. He was employed by that mosque in Luton. So all the things that we've been warning about, and you can track it back, people can see it. It's like they were right, we were right, but there's no good feeling in that.
I've been following your career and your comments for a long, long time, and you're right. I mean, you had a front row seat to all of this stuff. It was happening in your town. You saw the face of Luton changing. You also saw these gangs developing. And as you watched all of this unfold, you started sounding the alarm. But time and time again, when people heard that alarm, instead of paying attention to it, they focused on the man who was sounding the alarm and saying, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're discriminating, as opposed to thinking, hang on a moment, this man might have a warning here about the safety and security of all of us.
Yeah, and look, at the same time, growing up in a town like Luton, we have, when you talk about the demographical change, we have probably 60,000 Muslims in Luton. Some of the best people I've met growing up are Muslim. That's the truth. So I've met some amazing Muslim characters in my life, and I said from the start, my rhetoric has never changed. I've said, look, I'm not against Muslims. I don't say I want Muslims deported from my country. What I'm saying is I want to stop the influence and the growing spread of Saudi-funded Wahhabist Salafist Islam, which is spreading through our country. It's taken over our country. It's actually everything we spoke about. If you look at the universities, every single institution in the UK, whether it be schools, have now been taken over. It's now been exposed that they were getting governors into schools. They were teaching extremism within the schools across our country. The prison institution is basically an ISIS training camp. The universities, the amount of radical extremists, Hizb ut-Tahrir, I've seen them come up a lot in Australia, yep. That organisation. They have a base in every university in the UK. Now, when I was going through the terrorists that have come out of universities who are ex-members of the University Islamic Society, there's literally about 30 that have gone on and committed terrorism. It's insane. And so every single institution in our country is being used against us. Now, I've spoke out about it. I'm saying we need to do this. We need to do things we've warned about for years. And it's quite frustrating because 5 years later, we now see that the government are talking about setting up different extremism units within the prisons. That's not going to solve it either. It's not big enough. They're talking about putting only 30 radical Muslims in the UK into one of these units. I've been in the prison system. There's 30 on each wing. There's 30 radicals on every wing, and they're radicalising and converting. And my point is, if you have men that are planning, that 6 men were in prison for 30 years, they were planning to kill me. They were caught with guns and bombs and suicide notes. Now, they can't be in prison at any time with car thieves. They can't. These men are enemy combatants. We are in a war, and they have signed up against us. And you're allowing them to use our prison system to radicalise the most vulnerable and weak people in our society. People who have usually been, because I've been through the system, people have usually been wronged their whole life. They've usually had a bad start in life. They've had all these things, and then they're taking all of that and putting it into an ideology that will hate us. Even the most recent terrorist that they just went and shot 2 police officers last week in Paris, he spent 20 years in prison, and he was radicalised in prison. Most of these, Khalid Massoud was the Westminster attacker, time and time again. And the reason why they're too scared or cowardly to deal with these problems is because if they want to deal with it, they have to admit it. They have to admit that Islam as an ideology is promoting segregation, is promoting intolerance. And again, I always point out, I'm not saying all Muslims, because all Muslims don't follow the doctrines and the exact word of Islam. The majority actually don't. The majority just live peacefully and want to be liberal. But the message to true liberals, even in Australia, like, you think you're defending, and it's honourable to defend a minority, which it is. But you don't understand what's coming with it that you're defending. And within years to come, you will understand. When the demographic and the statistical change happens, what I always say is my hometown of Luton is a blueprint for every other town and city in Britain, and that's a blueprint for other countries in Europe, and that should be a blueprint for you in Australia. You should be looking and learning from our mistakes where we failed. And what I can't understand is that some countries really aren't. They're still trying to say, we'll bring more in. Luton has a 30 to 40% population of Muslims. If you look at where the most problems are, they're obviously in Luton, in the UK, in towns like that. Luton's named by the CIA as the terrorist epicentre for Europe. Now, you want to look at around Europe, where the most terrorist attacks are. The most terrorist attacks are in France. That's because the demographical change in the percentage of Muslims is more than anywhere else. We had 14 terror attacks stopped last year. 14 last year. Now, people think there was only one got through. What people need to understand is if those 14 terror attacks weren't stopped, we'd have seen more soldiers beheaded, you'd have seen shopping centres shot up, you'd have seen a football stadium targeted, you'd have seen all of these things. Then you'd realise we are in a war. And we are in a war where in the UK we have 3,500 Muslims monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That costs us £9 billion a year. Now, if you want to go to Belgium, they have 20,000 being monitored. These are small armies that are growing. And to simply ignore it through the call of diversity is cowardly, and it's treasonous to your own people. And it's treasonous to a lot of decent Muslims as well, who just want to live, but that it's hard for them to live when it's all orchestrated and organised. Everything that's happening, the money's funneling in from Saudi Arabia. It's all planned. I witness it all when we trace back the money. It's all planned. And I feel a desperate situation of where we're at, and I really think people need to wake up to it, and not sit on the fence, and be honest and outspoken. And that's what I am, and that's why. And a lot of people haven't liked that. I just said it's just the truth's the truth. That's it. The truth is not hate speech. If I'm telling the truth backed up by stats and statistics, if I talk about British Muslims, I will tell you that 66% of them this is a government statistic. 66% of them said they would not report on another Muslim that was going to join ISIS. When you hear these sort of figures, that's why after the French attacks in Paris, the most wanted man in the world, well at that time, was walking around his home community of Molenbeek for 3 months. No one reported on. And this all comes back to ideology of Islam, where it says in the Quran you cannot side with a kafir against a Muslim, or you'll go to hellfire. All these sorts of things. So, yeah, we have huge problems. And as you said, you welcome me on. I want to come on. I want to warn Australia. I want to warn America. I want to warn these countries to say, look, it's not bigoted and it's not fascist and it's not racist. You have to protect your people. Now, you have to do that. You have to limit the influence Islam has on your society.
You're listening to Tommy Robinson, but are you hearing him? I want to know, and I direct that question to political leaders in Australia. Are you hearing what Tommy Robinson's got to say from his own experience? And all of the things that he's saying now, he said before this was a major problem in the UK. He was the former leader of the English Defence League. He now runs an organisation called Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamisation of the West, which originated in Germany. He's also the author of a best-selling book called Enemy of the State. There is a little bit of a feeling in the community that if you raise these issues that you're a bad person, you shouldn't be raising it. But I'm like you. I've got Muslim mates, and I find it easy to justify my comments to my Muslim mates because I just say, hey, look, you've got to understand, I'm not speaking about you. I'm speaking about others who threaten our safety and our security.
The annoying thing is, it's the far left that can't separate people from an ideology. We can. We can. I said, I can be as opposed as I want and as critical as I want against an ideology. It's there to be opposed. I said, without promoting hatred against its followers. That's not hard. I said, but the left don't think that's possible, which it clearly is. I said, and if I read into Islam and I see such negative points and such fascism and extremism, then it should be called out. It has to be called out every time. The other reason why people are scared. Why are people scared about this issue? I've seen it. I saw I forget her name, but I saw a presenter who come out and spoke in Australia, and she was hounded afterwards. I think she might have even lost her job.
Sonia Kruger.
Yeah,
she made a comment about concern. It was after the Nice terror attack, and she made a comment about being concerned about this growing threat in Australia. And you're right. I mean, I went into bat for her on this program, but you're right. Right across the place, she was almost hounded out of a job.
Hounded out of a job. So this is the reason why. And the more people that use their courage to speak out with platforms like you've got, Ben, the more it becomes acceptable to talk.
Let me ask you about this, because that fear of speaking out can be very costly and very dangerous. I've read many times about a case from the UK in Rotherham. Now, this is 2014. An independent inquiry found that men of Pakistani origin had groomed at least, wait for it, 1,400 young girls for sexual exploitation over the previous 16 years. These were Muslim gangs, but the inquiry found a blatant failure by city officials and police who didn't prosecute the well-known and well-documented crime ring. Why? Because they feared that they would be accused of being bigots.
Yeah. Anyone who asks me how powerful is political correctness, then it allowed a generation of youth to be raped, tortured and beaten in our country. That's how powerful it is. And if we talk about Rotherham, there was 1,400 girls. Yesterday I was in Oxford. Now, when people hear of Oxford, probably from Australia, what do you think of? You think of the world's best university.
Correct.
You think of the beautiful architecture. Well, in this town, in this city of Oxford, there was another court case yesterday. I went outside the court. The video will be uploaded tomorrow. 17 Muslim men are on trial for raping and grooming young girls. There was another case 2 years ago. What they did to one of the girls was they got an iron rod and they heated it up, and it had the letter M on it, and they marked it on the girl's bum when she was 11 because she was the property of Muhammad. Okay, where this happened, in the house this happened, is called Manzil Way. They've changed the name of the road, and it's a huge, massive mosque, huge, and Manzil translates as Mosque Way. Now, the girl was being systematically groomed, beaten and pimped in a house opposite the mosque. Followers were walking out of the mosque and going into the mosque to take their turns with a sexual slave. Now, when all this comes about, the reason why people don't like me is because why do I connect the fact that these men are Muslim, and why do I connect their religion? Why do I do that? Because when I've gone through the case after case, for example, in a case in Bristol where the Somalian gangs were getting arrested, one of them said it was his religious duty to do what he was doing. In many of the other cases, next to Rotherham is a town called Rochdale. There was a huge case in Rochdale, and one of the men there, when the men were in court, a Labour councillor, a Muslim Labour councillor, went to court and gave a character reference. The ex-mayor, who's a Muslim, went to court and gave a character reference for the rapists, for the child rapists who were beating and raping children.
Tell me this, Tommy Robinson. I mean, we know that sexual assaults and crimes against children don't just happen in the Muslim community, but why have we seen so many examples in your part of the world where you've got these gangs operating in this way against children and against women?
Well, 90% of the street grooming gang convictions in the UK, 90% are Muslim men.
Why?
That's from a population of 4%. 20% are called Muhammad. Why? Because if you read the Quran, and if we look at it, ISIS have come out and said it. The leader of Boko Haram have come out and said it. Muhammad did it. If you read the Quran, verse after verse after verse, it states that Muslim men can take whatever they want outside of their four wives. Muslim men can take whatever they want that their right arm possesses. That's what it states. They can take sexual slaves. They're allowed to. And that's clearly said. And Muhammad clearly did it. And if you read the biography of Muhammad and you read about his life, that's what he did. In one case, for example, and this is where I have the problem, where people say, yes, but we've got 1.2 billion Muslims in the world, and in the UK we've got 3 or 4 million Muslims. But that shouldn't stop me from telling the truth. And this isn't the truth coming from Tommy Robinson. This is Islamic scripture. In Islamic scripture, in the biography of Muhammad, in his life by Ibn Ishaq, which is the most renowned biography of his life in the Islamic world, yeah, he beheaded 600 people. After beheading this Jewish tribe, he then took the leader of the Jewish tribe's wife, Sophia. He took her that night and he raped her. Now, what they say is that he married her. She's not going to have willingly married a man that has just killed her husband. Okay, so these sort of stories. This is a man that's held up as the perfect man.
And these things have to be discussed because, let's face it, many other faiths, including the Christian faith, it's had problems. The Catholic Church has had problems when it comes to abuse, and these are things that have been confronted in a major way without fear of people being accused of discriminating against a certain religion. It's been raised and it's been addressed because we say we can't accept this stuff no matter where it's going on.
That's precisely it. It's not just... If I was opposed to Scientology, no one would call me a racist or an extremist. If I was opposed to Christianity, no one would be calling me far right. Yeah? These labels are now used to try and silence and stifle any debate around this issue. And if we're having a debate around an issue of facts, it's facts. There's over 100 verses in the Quran that incite people to kill non-Muslims. These are facts. And I don't say that most Muslims follow it or even accept it. Because most Muslims are oblivious to it.
Well, what about the leadership of the Muslim communities in your country and in mine? We had a case not so long ago where Hizb ut-Tahrir, who you talked about before, where we had women's leaders of the women's group of Hizb ut-Tahrir releasing a video saying, oh, look, if you're going to bash your wife, you should only use a small stick. We had another Muslim leader saying, if you're going to bash your wife, it should only be as a last resort. I mean, there's a real vacancy, isn't there, of real leadership in Muslim communities, in Australia certainly, and I'm guessing in your part of the world as well.
Yes, there is. And again, that comes down to a verse in the Quran that says if your wife disobeys you, first of all, talk to her. If that doesn't work, don't pleasure her in the bed. If that doesn't work, strike her. That's word for word what it says. Beat her. So that's a problem. That's a problem that feminists should be addressing, that all the groups and people that should be addressing these issues have failed. They're scared to. They don't. In fact, they side and support it. So it's a huge, huge issue. And when you talk about the leadership of many, especially on Hizb ut-Tahrir. Hizb ut-Tahrir years ago in the UK held a conference in probably 2006. That 10,000 people went to this conference. Now, That if the Labour Party held a conference, they couldn't get 10,000 people.
Yeah.
They couldn't get 10,000 people. So how big of a problem is this? How embedded in the society is it? Is it getting better or worse? Terrorism arrests go up in the UK 60% every year. So we know it's getting worse. When you look at the demographical change, if I talk about, I'll just bring it back to where I live again. Yeah. By 2030. The government statistics are that the Bangladeshi and Pakistani community of Luton will increase by 70 to 77%. The white and black community of Luton will increase by 1.3%. Now, this is why many political parties are pandering and appeasing, because the future demographical change of all of our societies, if left to be, will be Islamic. That will be the growing force. So already in my hometown, as a white working class man, as an English community, we are already a minority in Luton. We are irrelevant. We don't vote in a military fashion. We don't listen to our leaders to tell us who to vote, like the Islamic community do. There's many speeches. There's a speech by a gentleman called Khalid Malik, who was the first Labour minister, first Muslim Labour minister. In his speech, he says, for example, 2001 we had 1 Muslim MP, in 2004 we had 2 Muslim MPs, in 2008 we had 6 Muslim MPs, in 2012 we'll have 10 Muslim MPs, and in between each thing he says, inshallah, 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 God willing, God willing, God willing. He says, but in 20 years the leader of this country will share our faith, and they're all cheering. There's thousands of Muslims in this hall, and they're all cheering. Now the problem we have is, what has your faith got to do with politics? What has your religion got to do with the political system in the country? Now for us, it doesn't have much. We have separation of church and state. But to them, that's all that matters. That's all that matters, is that the person is a Muslim. That's it. I've just looked. There's a mayoral campaign just come up for someone to stand as the mayor of Greater Manchester. Now, whoever gets in control of Greater Manchester is in charge of the NHS. They're in charge of the police. Now, a Muslim man called Mohammed is running for the mayor of Manchester. When he was on the BBC News to give his 1-minute slot, he done it in Urdu with an English translation at the bottom. He done it in Urdu. It's like he couldn't even speak English.
Well, our Grand Mufti here in Australia doesn't speak English, and when he was given that title, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, I was on the air the afternoon the news came through, and I said, look, let's invite him on the program to have a discussion. And his offsider said, oh, no, he doesn't speak English. And I thought, what? This is a faith that is facing so many issues and so many problems. And for the good Muslims out there, they need someone who is respectable and someone who can communicate with the wider community. But no, the bloke they put in the role can't even speak English. Tommy, I want to ask you, you had a friend who was radicalised. One of your best friends was radicalised.
So as I was growing up, I used to knock around with a lad called Roger. Now, Roger lived up the road from me, grew up on the same estate. Roger's now in jail for being an ISIS terrorist. So, and even 2 years above me, a kid in school, he's now in jail as well. He's in jail for the most recent terror plot. There was another 6 just gone down from Luton. There was another 5 just before that who were planning to blow up our territorial army. What I always say to people is, say like the Stockholm bomber. The Stockholm bomber lived 3 doors up from my auntie. The fertilizer, not the fertilizer bomb plot. The other men that were planning to blow up the territorial army. He lived next door to my best friend. This is not things that I read about, which is with journalists. When I speak to journalists in our country who are have always tried to put us down. I don't know what the class system's like in Australia, but because of the way we walk and we talk and we look and we act, because we're from working class backgrounds, that we're viewed negatively by the liberal elite who are controlling our journalism. So they have a negative perception of us anyway, but they don't live. It's like when I pick any of these people, or I find any of these people, when I look where they live in exclusively 99.9% white Christian
But a lot of
areas.
these terrorists that you talk of, I mean, they were your friends. You were mates with them. You saw all of this unfold right before your eyes.
I've witnessed it all. One of my best friend, Barry, that was Barry. He's now called Imran. He converted in jail, and we haven't spoke for years now. But I've watched the system of what happens to him, and to be honest, it's not right, and they're weak, and at the same time, what Islam is doing in the UK is it fills a void. It fills a void where, if I give an example again to Luton, I'm from Luton, I'm white, and I'm English. I watch St Lucian Day, where we have fairgrounds to celebrate St Lucian Day. We have a big party in the town. I watch St Patrick's Day, where we have a 3-day festival to celebrate being Irish. I watch Eid, where we have fairgrounds everywhere shut off, massive celebrations. St George's Day, our day, to celebrate being English. They sent letters out to all the school kids saying, if you bring in the emblem of St George, you'll be sent home from school. Being English, we're made to feel dirty and ashamed of our history, when we shouldn't. And so what they then have is many of the English people are walking around lost. Our 16-year-olds are looking at the floor. Everything is focused towards everyone else can be proud of their identity, who they are, and their history and their culture. Everybody. We can't. So then you have a void being filled, which is why so many people are converting to Islam, because it's a powerful thing.
You've got a theory, and we've got an issue in Australian jails at the moment of radicalisation. That is the key location that the authorities are most concerned about radicalisation. We hear a lot about people being radicalised online and people being radicalised in mosques, but the area that they are most concerned about prisons, when people are behind bars. You've got a theory on why so many people convert to Islam when they're behind bars.
Oh, I've seen it. That they have to. They have to. So, and I've spoke to the prison officers. They have to through fear, and this is all now finally come out in the press that convert, pay money or die. That is in the scripture of Islam, the Surah 9:5. That's the option. That's the same in prison. That's what the gangs are doing in prison. So people are converting. At first, they're not even converting because they believe anything about Muhammad or Islam. They're converting because they're scared. And it's part of a gang. So the biggest gang in the system, and no other religion can be used as a gang like this. But as soon as you have a big beard, and the worrying thing is, the majority of Muslims when I went into prison, they're not Pakistani, they're not Afghani, they're English, they're white, they're black, they're born and bred here.
So what can be done behind bars? You're now advocating for separate prisons to reduce the threat of radicalisation.
I'd advocate for separate prisons for anyone who's involved with ISIS, extremism and terrorism should be in one prison. Then we need a separate prison for the Muslims and non-Muslims. I'd also separate the average Muslims from these extremists because they'll be preyed upon as well. That has to happen. I think if you look at the statistics, say for example, we look at France. 7% of France is Muslim, 77% of the prison's Muslim. You look at Belgium, 60% of the prisons are Muslim. This is a mass problem, and you can't ignore it. And again, when I look at the life of Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, what he did is all the people were outcast from society. They were living out in the hills, hiding because they're criminals and thieves. He went out. That's who he recruited. That's who he recruited as his barbarians at the start. That's exactly the same. You have to understand that these men in prisons who have been sitting there for 10 years, who have no fear of the law, no fear of prison, no fear of society, the most hardened, violent and toughest men in some societies are now coming out radicalised Muslims. 600 are coming out a year in the UK that we have to worry about. 600 radicalised Muslims. I think we've got 70 terrorists being released this year. Now, we know they're not being reformed. We know that. And do you know what the answer's been when all this cry for the problem? Do you know what they did a few years ago? They sent an extra 100 imams into the prison system to deal with it.
Gosh.
Now the way to deal with this is not with more Islam. As our politicians say, which your politicians, I guarantee you, they say the same. When these terrorists commit this terrorism or extremism, they say they're not real Muslims. Well, if they're not Muslims, don't give them a Quran. Don't let them eat halal meat. Don't let them go to mosque. Stop them from being promoting Islam in the prison if they're not real Muslims, if that's what you're telling us. But you don't. The minute they get to prison, and many of these Muslims, prison is a very halal life for them. It's fine.
All right. What else can you do outside of prison? What else can you do as far as, I know you've discussed before the building of new mosques, also Muslim immigration, whether there should be a pause to Muslim immigration to the UK for a period of 5 years or something like that. What other levers could you pull if you're sitting there in the Prime Minister's office to reduce or help eliminate the threat of radical Islam?
End the funding coming into your country and our country from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Iran. End it tomorrow. How is it that these backward barbarian countries such as Saudi Arabia are propagating and organising and facilitating and running the schools in many towns and cities in the UK? It's just complete insanity. It's insane. So that's just a basic step that should be happening anyway. That's not even a radical move.
I've interviewed Ayan Hirsi Ali before, the former Muslim turned activist. She says those Muslim-only schools, I mean, you're asking for trouble. She says they should be shut down, and it's against the culture of your own country. You want kids together in the same school integrating.
Any one of you can go online and look up the undercover documentaries that have gone on in the UK where we looked at these madrasas. We see the young children literally having the Quran violently beaten into them. We see the teacher standing up saying, if you see a British man, you walk to the other side of the road. You don't want to be part of that filthy, disgusting society. Yeah, we see them promoting hatred against Hindus. It's all there to view. So, and I know this is going on. I have a friend called Sully, whose mum was Kenyan, his dad was white. Yeah? He was a Muslim. He come to our school at 11 because they had to take him out of the madrasa he was in because they started teaching him that his dad had the devil in him. Now, there was another Muslim man who had sex with a young child. Now, when he went to court, he said, I didn't understand the law. I've only been brought up in my madrasa, which taught me, which is the rule of Islam, that when a girl starts starts her period, it's fine. He goes, so I didn't understand that it was wrong. And he got off of it in court. These sort of things. Why are we having any of these things? And when I talk about the building of mosques, yeah, I do say, I say stop Muslim immigration and stop the building of mosques. Not forever, but until we get control of this system. When we look at schools, in the UK we have a Ofsted, which Ofsted go into the schools and make sure everything's right, and they write them and they grade them. You see, you need a similar system for the mosques. 90% of the imams in the mosques can't speak English. 90%. There's only about 7% where any British-born Muslim has an involvement in the hierarchy and leadership of the mosque. So what have we got? When people talk about Islam in Britain, we haven't got a different Islam in Britain than we've got in Afghanistan, when you've got the tribal leaders coming from caves and mountains in Afghanistan and talking in the mosques in Luton. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, Tommy, let me take you back to where it all started for you. You first became engaged on this issue when you discovered the Taliban was actively recruiting people in your hometown of Luton, and this is well before a lot of these terror attacks had taken place. When you look back at that young man who stood up in a public place and warned about these things, even though a lot of people were trying to shout you down, how do you feel knowing what's played out in the years since?
I feel frustrated and I feel angry, and I feel that because I think of how my life's had to change. I can't walk down the street. The government have given me 6 Osman warnings. An Osman warning is where there is an intense, there is direct information they have that people are planning to kill me. I've had violent beatings time and time again. The life that I've had to live and the changes to my life and my family, and all because of what? That's what I'm angry about. I think this is my country, and I speak openly, which I should have free speech, and because of this I have to live a life of fear. And to be honest, Ben, I'm waiting to be killed. And that's how, and I know that as a reality. That's a reality. That's not me. That's not me being exaggerating the situation. That I know that's going to happen. And why? There are people in this country who are educated to control our country. They have, with all the benefits of it. And there's people whose job it is who are being paid and have the security around them to say what needs to be said. But it's left to us. It's left to us with no security, with no real education in our communities, and it's been left to us. And that's
you've got
what
a
angers
family.
me.
You're a family man, and you've been the subject of countless death threats, but you keep on speaking up, Tommy Robinson. You've never been coward, you've never been intimidated or bullied, even though your life is literally on the line.
Yeah, that's simply because I look at my kids every day, and I am fully aware of where we're heading. So if I was silent, all I'm doing is leaving the struggle to my son. That's all I'm doing. Wow. So I look at my kids and I'm fully aware, and no one can deny it. Are things getting better? Where are we going to be? What's happened in the last 3 or 4 years? Where's it going to be in another 3 or 4 years? This is the reality. Now, we have a duty. I have a duty as an Englishman. I have a duty as a father to hand down a safe and prosperous country to our next generation. When we look at what previous generations of our forefathers would have gone through across the globe to hand down and protect our rights, our freedoms, and we're giving them away.
Let me bring you back, just to wrap things up, to a comment that you made at the start of this interview where you spoke about your comments and your criticisms not being directed at all Muslims. And it's a shame that we even need to say that, because you'd think most people would understand that these days, but we say it again anyway. I asked the same question to Ayan Hirsi Ali when she joined me on the program. What do you say to your Muslim mates, to the Muslim people who are listening at the moment, whose hearts are breaking because they're hearing these kind of comments being made about members of their faith? What do you say to them about letting them know that this is something we need to talk about, even though it may be awkward or uncomfortable or difficult for them to listen to, and even though it's not directed at them? What do you say to those people listening right now?
Many Muslims would have come to our countries for the freedom it has. Don't allow that freedom to be taken away. Don't allow that freedom to be eroded, which we're seeing it eroded on a daily basis. And that erosion is coming, unfortunately, under the cloak and hanger of your ideology that you follow. I'd advise most Muslims, unfortunately, even in this country. I met a man yesterday who was an apostate of Islam. We look at what they have to go through, apostates, just to have true freedom of religion. I believe in freedom of religion, but our leaders don't. Islamic leaders don't. When you look at the polls and statistics, they don't. Muslims, if a man is born into a Muslim family and does not believe it, he should be free to say that. But they're not. There's all this fear and intimidation within their own community. And to any Muslims, any people who are living out there who are living under that fear, then yeah, I wish you luck, because unfortunately there's been apostates beaten violently, and I think we're only time away now from seeing apostate murdered in the UK for
Tommy, to
expressing
anyone
freely.
listening to you right now who wants to keep in contact with what you're saying, they want to read more about you, they want to see more of you, what are the contact points? Where do people hear more or see more of Tommy Robinson?
So now, after 8 years of experience, what the media have done to us and the lies they tell, and basically fake news for years, I'm now working with an organisation called Rebel Media. That's where you'll find me. That's where you'll find us. For example, yesterday, I went into the mainstream media headquarters in the UK. I walked in because they run a headline calling me far right. Now, Ben, I'm not far right. I'm not racist. Most of my friends are not white. Yeah, most of the people I love are not white. Yeah, I have no far right views. I'm just criticising an ideology. So I went in and confronted the journalist who wrote the story and said, please justify how I'm far right. Could he? Of course he couldn't. I went to another journalist the day before who ran a headline saying I was a racist. I went to his house and said, just justify it. None of these people can, and I think we need to put an end to this. And what we're seeing now is an alternative media where, for example, after the Westminster attacks, 30 million people watched my videos that week. So the mainstream media are now becoming irrelevant in this case, and people are searching for answers. They're searching for answers, and they're searching for people telling the truth. You'll find the truth at Rebel Media, and you'll find the truth of us.
Lovely talking to you. Let's talk again. Thanks so much.